And we're back with this 2010 Ford Edge. As you can see, we got some brand new parts in. We got a new snap ring for the wheel bearing, the wheel bearing itself, a new nut for the CV shaft, as well as a brand new hub. Okay, so let me go ahead and get back to the same exact spot where I left off in the last video. So I'm gonna have to take everything apart, only because there's no sense in you guys watching me do the same exact work over again. So let me get back to that spot. In the meantime, you guys can watch my test drive after installing the CV shaft, because I did take it out for a test drive to see if it fixed our noise. Before we move on to the wheel bearing, I wanted to test drive the Ford Edge to see if the new axle made a difference. Of course, the trans fluid has been topped off, and so far I can't replicate the noise again. Remember, before we didn't have to drive that fast. Even just coasting, we could hear that constant knocking sound. And I've been driving around a few times and I can't seem to replicate it anymore. So it seems like the CV shaft did fix it. So I'm right at the point where we could start to remove the wheel bearing. Of course, the hub has to come off first. Now I could grab my slide hammer and do that. I suspect it'll come off pretty easy considering how loose the hub is. But let's just go the easier route and use the Astro 78-830. This should get the job done. Some sort of a washer. As you can see, I'm not really prepared for any of this. That right there looks pretty good. And for back here, we need a spacer that's going to grab only on the hub, which is the center ring right there. As you can see, I got this spacer and it seems to like fit perfectly, right? But you also got to consider, while you're pulling this thing through, you don't want your spacer to get locked or press fit into the actual wheel bearing. So I think that's a little bit too large. We'll move down to the next size smaller, which is this one. You can see there's plenty of clearance, so it's going to hold on to the hub, push it out without getting wedged inside of the wheel bearing. I hope that makes sense. So all we have to do now, push the forcing screw in, put on our spacer, and then we put on the giant nut that goes on the back side. So I believe I have everything set up. I'm going to come on this side to get out of your way, and I'm just going to use a large crescent wrench to hold the giant nut on the back side, and the impact gun is going to go ahead on the front. And this hub should pull out. I could have just gave it the stink eye and it would have came out all by itself. Just goes to show how bad the wheel bearing was, that it took like almost zero force to pull that thing out. Now I'm kind of disappointed that I took the time to set this whole thing up. Yeah, it looks pretty nasty inside of here. Hey, at least the snap ring's still in place, right? Let's go ahead and try some German-made tools. The Knipex 4811J3. All right. Make sure you got your safety glasses on. Of course, I have mine on. Today I'm using the Magnums. There we have it. Nice and smooth. Now that we got the snap ring removed, we could actually start to press out or pull out that wheel bearing. And I'm going to be using the Astro 78-825 for this one. As you can see, I love the Astro tools. By the way, if you're looking for the tools I use, just check my Amazon link in the description. It has everything there. I'm not trying to tell you guys on anything, but I'm just showing you the tools that I love. Why? Because they last long, they get the job done, and in my opinion, they're DIY friendly because they don't cost a lot. Doesn't break the bank. Those are like the best combinations. You never get stuff like that. So let me find the correct adapters that I need here that's gonna work on this vehicle, and I'll bring you guys back. All right, so I believe I got the correct adapter for the rear end of the wheel bearing. You can see it presses up against the actual bearing itself, but it's not gonna get wedged inside of there. So that's a good sign. That one's gonna work. Now, as far as the front, I chose basically the largest cup, which is this one, and it's gonna sit just right over the knuckle, just like that. And this piece, you see how it's got all these tapers on it, or ridges for different diameters. Normally you could go ahead and set it up, and it makes it super easy to set everything up because it kind of locks in and holds itself in place. But sometimes I find that this depth that's being pushed into the cup like that, guys, I'm lost for words today, but you're just gonna have to bear with me. This is actually taking up precious real estate inside of the cup, and sometimes when you're pulling the wheel bearing out, it's going to bottom out against this, and then you're going to have to disassemble your setup, redo it all over again. So what I found is to just turn the cup upside down, and sure, you don't have the the lips here to position it. It seems like you're going to need a third arm to hold all this stuff, but it is possible. And that way it ensures that the wheel bearing comes out on the very first pull. So don't forget about your little washers. One goes on this side. Put the forcing screw in. And drop the rear cup just like that. Okay, so let's put this back. You remember that part where I said you're gonna need 3 arms? It seems like you're going to need a third arm to hold all this stuff. You see, I did say that. Anyway, another washer goes back here, and then you put the giant nut on. So for something like this, make sure you got your hearing protection on. Mine are impact rated, so we're good to go. Hold the backside again with a crescent wrench. Let's go ahead and give it the salsa. Wow, that one's in there tight, guys. You can see my mid-torque impact gun doesn't want to cut it. All right, so now we got the big boy here. Let's see what happens. And there we have it. That's the wheel bearing. Let me show you guys. That's it right here. So this board is all cleaned out, everything looks real nice. I got the brand new wheel bearing right here. Some of them are directional, so you got to keep that in mind. This one isn't, it could go on any way. As you can see, there's also no ABS pickup ring, because on this vehicle the ABS picks up off of the CV shaft right there. So we could pretty much press this in anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this started. As far as lubrication, I'm just going to use like a penetrating oil. I'm not going to put a grease on it. You can put a grease, but penetrating oil is just a lot easier for me right now. As far as the adapters for the new wheel bearing, you want to find an adapter that just barely fits the outer diameter of the bearing itself. But if you look closely, you can see it's slightly smaller. Hopefully you guys can pick that up. And this is what you want, because when you start pressing it in, if your adapter is the same exact diameter as a wheel bearing, there's potential to get this thing stuck inside of there. It's happened to me before, so be careful with that. And then pretty much the same exact thing on the rear of the knuckle. You need a larger adapter, because this time, instead of pressing through the hole, since we're trying to pull something in, you want your adapter to be larger than the knuckle, so it sits right on the surface instead of going into this hole. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we're just about there. You could probably tell that the wheel bearing is at a little bit of an angle, and in my experience, they usually straighten themselves out, but don't push it too much. Within the first little pulls, if it doesn't straighten itself out, then just back off and fix the problem. So once again, Let's see what happens. Hopefully you guys can tell that it did straighten itself out. Oh, my battery's dead. I think that explains why it's having a hard time pulling the wheel bearing out and now pushing it back in. So let me go ahead and replace the battery on my impact gun. By the way, you could also freeze the wheel bearing, like you put it in your freezer overnight, and that really helps to press these things in. At this point, I could see that my cup or my adapter is off center. So on this side, it's actually hitting the knuckles. So there's nothing wrong with loosening it, readjusting things. If you're wondering when do you stop, you'll know when to stop. You'll see your socket basically stop spinning. The sound of the impacting may even change. I'm just gonna back it off. At this point, the wheel bearing should be fully seated. Come back, little buddy. And yes, it is fully seated. I can see the groove right there for the snap ring. Absolutely do not forget about that snap ring, because if you do, you can destroy the brand new wheel bearing and you'll be doing this job all over again. On top of that, it's dangerous. You may die. Earlier when you saw me using the wire wheel to clean out the bore, and I was trying to really get in this groove right here, the purpose of that is to get the corrosion out so that the new snap ring is going to seat and make sure it won't pop out in the future. So here goes our brand new snap ring. Sometimes these are directional. You have to pay really close attention to them, but this one appears like it could go on either way. And for some reason, I like to put the opening of the snap ring towards the bottom. It's just personal preference. Honestly, you could put it in any orientation that you want to. Ooh, you guys heard that nice, satisfying click. That thing is fully seated and it looks beautiful. And now it's time to press in a brand new hub. All the force when this thing is going in is going to be on the inner race of the new wheel bearing. So from the back side, you have to support that inner race. So as you can see, I have a very small adapter here. We are not worried about covering the entire diameter. All you really have to support is this inner piece of metal. So you can see this piece is just small enough to support that inner race. And that's an easy mistake to make if you're not really paying attention. Thankfully, I've been pretty good about this when I'm doing these type of wheel bearings, and I have yet to have one. It doesn't mean it's not possible. Anyone could slip up. You know what? I forgot to spray the back of the hub and the face of the wheel bearing with CRC. It's just rust protection. It's not needed, but it's something I like to do. So let me go ahead and pull this off of here. The biggest thing we're protecting here is the snap ring. It's not going to get completely eaten up by rust in the future. And the next time someone has to remove that snap ring, not only is it going to be in perfect condition, but it's going to come right out. And as you can see, I sprayed the back side of the hub also to protect it from corrosion. So now we can go ahead and put this thing back together. All right, so a little bit of penetrating oil right where it's gonna get pressed in. Let's go ahead and give it the salsa. Now at this point, make sure you have your snap ring installed, because if you don't, it's a lot of wasted time and wasted money. You're gonna be doing this job over again. So I went ahead and cleaned this off real fast on our brand new CV shaft. Last time I didn't put any grease here because I knew it was going into a nasty old wheel bearing that was just full of corrosion. But now that everything is brand new, just using some high temp wheel bearing grease here. Purpose of this is so that it doesn't seize in the future. If anyone has to come in here to replace anything, this thing's gonna come right out with no issues at all. And a moment of truth, I should have probably tested to see if the CVX was gonna fit into the hub, but I got faith, we should be all right. There we go, popped in nice and smooth. All right, guys, so everything's looking really good here. I don't think I need to show you guys anything else because it's just putting all this stuff back together. Nothing special here, nothing interesting, and I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be. But one thing we can look at is our new seal that we put in. It's been like 4 or 5 days, so let's have a closer look at this. Now, when I first looked at this when the car came in, I thought to myself, oh man, it looks like this seal is leaking a little bit. But if we come from the bottom down here, see my fingers, there's nothing dripping, there's nothing wet coming off of this thing. But if we get real close to right where the seal meets the housing of the transmission, it looks kind of moist and it looks kind of like a greenish tint. And I'm like, that can't be right, because we all know trans fluid is like a pink or like a dark red, right? And that's not what I'm seeing here. But then I remembered that when I installed that seal, I used this assembly lube, and I did smear it all the way around the outside edge of that seal, not only in the center where the spring is at, but also on the outside diameter. So that's what's happening, guys. It's this green goop that we're seeing on the transmission. Basically, the lubricant that I use to press the seal in, when the transmission gets hot, it's starting to melt it, and that's what's coming down. So it had me a little bit alarmed for a second until I realized what was going on. So that seal is not leaking. The little bit of stuff we're seeing on there is the assembly goo that's squeezed out around the edges of the seal, which is exactly what this thing said it's supposed to do. Dissolves quickly on startup for instant lubrication. So this thing is meant to dissolve under heat. So no problems here, guys. That seal looks great. There's nothing dripping or anything out of it. I'm super happy. So let me go ahead and put all this stuff back together. So I'm just about done here. As you can see, everything is torqued down on this side. There's one more thing before we go off our test drive. Now, if you guys remember correctly in the first video, on the front right side, that axle nut looked like it didn't belong. It looked kind of sus. And when I bought the stuff to do this side, we have a extra brand new axle nut. And the reason for that is because I ended up reusing the nut that came with the CV shaft, which is brand new. So I put that nut back on there, and that leaves us with one spare brand new one. So let's go ahead and take off the axle nut that the other guy put on over here that clearly doesn't belong. Let's put this one on and we'll torque it down to spec. And this one does have the nylon lock ring inside of it. All right, so this bad boy is ready for its maiden voyage. By the way, this thing got brand new tires all the way around since the last time it was here, and they got a brand new battery put into it, so now it cranks right up. Let me wash my hands and we'll go out for a test drive. All right, out for this test drive, and so far so good. No donkey noises. Some people pointed out that in the first video during the test drive, the noise this thing was making sounded like a donkey, and I was like, yeah, it does kind of sound like a donkey. Anyway, it's all gone, guys. Perfectly smooth, no noise at all. I think the noise we were hearing was from the axle, because after the axle got replaced, I had a hard time trying to replicate that sound, and I never heard it again. Surprisingly, the wheel bearing wasn't making as much noise as you would think, considering how bad it was and how loose it was. But at this point, it's sounding pretty good. No noise at all. Super smooth. So that's it for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.